Thank you so much,
Hey.
Dr. Perry. Hello.
Hello.
I'm going to put this on display.
Put that on display.
Yeah.
Available wherever fine books are sold, but you have them.
I can't imagine a more fitting note to close your talk on, even though there were so many compelling pieces of it. I think that is the spirit of why we're all in this room together, is that I think many of us have said this before, this is a team sport and we can't do it alone. And on that note, I don't think everyone knows some of the other issues that you have deeply advocated for in other stages of your career. So before I jump into a few questions about your presentation and PSA, please log into Whova, start putting in your questions, because we're going to see what gets upvoted and make sure we present those questions to Dr. Perry in this conversation. But can you tell the audience today a little bit about some of the other stages of your career and why it all makes sense?
Yeah, so much stems from the way I was raised, first and foremost. I really do believe that the way you gain power is by extending your family. I have people who I consider brothers and sisters who are not blood relatives, but they are my brothers and sisters. And I do believe that we all have civic brothers and sisters that we need to treat as such, as social siblings. My career started working on immigrant educational rights, actually right here in Texas. I did my dissertation on the DREAM Act. Back in the day, it was a different world. You had George Bush then, who actually had one of the most advanced at the time sort of worker to citizen type of proposals. But around 2001, the DREAM Act was about to pass, actually. It was going to pass. Orrin Hatch was one of the sponsors of the DREAM Act. And then something happened when I was a grad student working on this issue. 9/11 happened. And I remember I was sitting in a conference, we were counting the votes around the DREAM Act, showing that it's going to pass. We were comfortable it's going to pass. Somebody comes in the conference room and says, we're under attack. And all I could think about, I was in College Park at the time, I wasn't thinking about planes coming our way. It was, the DREAM Act is done. And it has been. So eventually, I went to New Orleans to become an academic. I was going to work at a think tank. I became an academic. Then something happened down when I was in New Orleans at the University of New Orleans. Hurricane Katrina happened. And I swear trouble does not follow me. But there I became a staunch education advocate and researcher. I started running charter schools out of the University of New Orleans. I became disaffected by the movement, largely because, and this is how I got more into housing. When I was there, I heard this over and over again. If we could only fix the schools, everything would be all right. And I said, that just didn't make sense. And I was studying at the time school budgets. It's like, something's not right. Something's not adding up. So I started this measuring home values, looking at how taxes were assessed, and everything was out of whack. So that's when I started just doing housing work and a lot of other things, looking at the social determinants of education. Eventually, I wrote something for a Brookings publication. We played footsie for about 10 years. They eventually called me up and said, hey, join the Brookings team as a fellow. And there I've been working on issues, because it's not just housing. Housing is so important to all the other things. So in the book, you'll see me talking about reproductive justice things. Because how do people pay for these treatments? Largely through the equity in their home. When people are running for office, how do people throw their put their name in the ring? Largely through home equity. Like or they're forced to take out loans. And so, so much stems from this housing devaluation. So I talk about all of those things as an overarching system.
Thank you. So as you were speaking, there was a moment when you were showing the map, and it was a side note that you weren't able to show anything about Austin because the population wasn't large enough to do so. That hit hard because it isn't an accident in some ways, given our history. Can you talk a little bit about that and why the lessons still matter?
Yeah, I mean, Austin's included in this bunch of cities that there was a significant population here, which should have picked up, but over the last 20 years or so, there's been leakage. People are leaving the city in record numbers. Some of the green dots I shared on that map, the places where areas where black neighborhoods, the homes in black neighborhoods are priced higher, some of that is a result of white people moving into those places. Just as that chart that showed as the black population increases, the prices go down. The reverse is true, right? As white people move in, the prices go up. Mm-hmm. And that's when I really started looking at, we have to also look at things like wages. I mean, it's not all about the value of the home and skyrocketing prices. That's important. But when wages are in sync with those changes, nobody cares. You ask for development.
Yeah.
So, but it is true that some of the policies and practices that were installed over time has really had a profound impact, particularly places in Texas, because this is, a place where a lot of black people move to because of the home values. And so to see that sort of loss is really in my opinion, that policies that were here were not checked. There wasn't an effort to sort of curb the things. In some cases were positive developments, but people just couldn't keep pace and they're moving out.
Well, and it's another reason why the conversation becomes metro area, regional in nature, to really make sure we're not being so City of Austin centric that we are missing the communities that have had to leave the city limits. But for a moment, staying on the City of Austin, really appreciating the way you present so much compelling data through story and through your own personal lens. We've got some important community organizations and advocates here in Austin, including the Austin Justice Coalition and Measure Austin, a data activist organization here, who know that it's really the community's experience that needs to be feeding the data, not just removed data collection. And those two organizations in just the last month or so released I think an over 60-page study about the Black experience in Austin and how the city has failed to meet the needs of Black communities here. In particular, talking about Black households earning 54 cents on the dollar compared to the median white household. Talk a little bit about this way of bringing story, data to inform our decisions.
Well, there's a couple things. One, I don't think people are moved by data at the end of the day. You saw in that hearing, people just not persuaded by data. As much as we say, I'm going to make data-driven decisions, that's only part of the way you change people. You have to work with their heart. You got to work with their emotions. You got to show people that, hey, if that was me in this situation, how would I feel? So growing up, I did not talk about my lived experience at all. And certainly in my academic training, I was actually told, don't talk about quote unquote black issues, that will distract the audience. What I've come to know is that if you want to advance policy, you have to share some illustration of how these policy issues play out in people's lives. Now, I will say this, what I try to do as much as possible, and I discourage organizations at times that show lots of disparities to not overemphasize the disparity, because no one invests in deficits. No one invests in problems. You share the strength. You share, the asset. So a lot of my work is actually somewhat uplifting. People say, oh, that housing gap, that's a tragedy. I mean, well, what I'm really showing is those homes are much more valuable than they are priced, which means the people are actually much more valuable than they are priced. When I share this data in Black communities, people go, I knew it. I knew it. And so for me, you have to share stories, but be careful of always sharing what's wrong. Share what's right. Share the strength. If anything, show how systems are robbing people of opportunities to shine. So that's the approach I take, which is a little different in a world where it's always gloom and doom, and you gotta share the opportunity, what is possible.
Thank you. I'd love to put the Whova questions up on the screen if we're able to show them. If not, you can follow along in the app itself. Some of you have already started submitting questions, and I want to start to bring those forward before I could monopolize this session very easily. So the top question that's rolled in is, what is the impact on Black real estate wealth by efforts to increase urban density? Helpful or hurtful?
I mean, it's a mixed bag. Again, that there's lots of cities in the United States where the influx of people toward the city includes Black people. Like in Atlanta is an interesting case because, yes, like Austin, people are moving there in mass, and including Black people, young Black people are moving to a lot of these places. And that's a good thing. It's just that the number of Black people moving in, a lot fewer. And so the current residents are the ones that are bearing the brunt of that influx. And so I say this, that, we do want to create amenities and create environments that are attractive. What we don't want to do is ignore the contributions of the people who are currently here. And that's what's happened. That's what's happened historically. That's what happens today. We would rather invest in someone coming in. And literally, and I sit on a lot of venture capital things where we will literally invest hundreds of millions in a moonshot idea instead of hundreds of millions into these community entrepreneurs and communities that have shown durability, staying power, economic strength. The fact that they're still here shows you that they're an asset. So why aren't you investing? So it's about creating that proper balance of recognizing the talent, the treasure, the assets you currently have, and using that as an anchor to invite people to come in. And you know, we saw this story, they sort of Amazon gambit, where cities were literally selling the farm to bring people. You don't have to do that. You can have a good balance of investing in local talent and using it as a way to attract people, and they will still come. You don't have to sell the farm.
Well, in Texas, where we don't have an income tax, so property tax becomes a huge vehicle with significant impact. Someone asks, would increases in appraisal values have the consequence of higher property taxes?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. No question about it. And that's why I say I would never, in the book I say something like, I would never wave a magic wand, policy wand, and increase prices in black neighborhoods. That would have an incredible negative impact on the residents. With that said, I want to create ways to slowly restore value to people first and foremost, to people, and allow those resources to build up the equity and value in place. So again, this goes back to that 3-column structure, that framework. You got to invest in people to restore the value that's been extracted by racism. How devaluation, what it looks like is less money in families' pockets. That's the money they use to send their kids to college, to start a business, to fix up their homes, to move to a better neighborhood. That money is lost, so you got to figure out ways to restore it through tax credits, through microloans, through other initiatives that say, hey, you should have more than what you're getting. Let's figure out ways to restore that value iteratively over time.
I see you all looking at your app for the questions, so I wondered if our AV friends could put the 3-pillar slide from the end of Dr. Perry's presentation that had those key principles, just to keep those alive during this conversation. Okay, the next top upvoted question is, what are projects, partners, city examples from your journeys that are inspiring exemplars of what's possible in investing in families in Black majority neighborhoods or cities?
Oh, we recently released a study in a neighborhood in Detroit, Michigan, and it's development without displacement. And we spotlighted the Livernois 6 Mile neighborhood. I will post it on my Twitter account, which is Andre Perry EDU. And I'll post the study there. And what we found is that there's been a sizable level of investment in this neighborhood, and you don't see displacement. Now, there were a couple of factors at play. You had a historic, good Black home ownership there. You had, it's an area for very good single-family homes. And then they deployed a lot of investment in the commercial corridor adjacent to those neighborhoods. So they built up the commercial corridors. But here's the important part. The investments went towards developers, entrepreneurs, and homeowners in the neighborhood. It gave, and I always talk about that, it gave residents an actual opportunity to participate in their own recovery. And that's what's always a lot of times missing. Yeah, we want development, we want developers, but we want them from the neighborhoods in which are affected by. So instead of, contracting out, you can do the same things internal, and that's what happened in the Livernois 6 Mile. So you've virtually seen no real shift in demographics. The white population is pretty much the same that it had been. It increased by about 3%. The education levels are increasing. You're getting new residents, and it's mostly higher income, higher educated, younger people, Black people moving in. And so it's, I'm not, I'm very clear in the study, that's not to say that neighborhood will always be like that. It could very easily see another influx of new residents. But what it did show that you don't see this immediate drop in the black population after you invest lots of money in there. And then we looked at the levels of investment, not just philanthropic or investment. We looked at mortgages, business loans, CDFI activity. So there was a measurement of all those investments. And after an increase, you just did not see displacement.
Okay, so check out your Twitter
Yeah.
for a link to that report. Just so you know who's in the audience as you answer the last few questions here, if we could take a quick poll. If you are part of the community development industry, raise your hand. If you are a local or county government official or representative, raise your hand. If you're associated with an academic institution, raise your hand, please. If you're
Let's go academics. Yeah.
Let's see, community organization, living in some of the neighborhoods that are experiencing exactly what Dr. Perry is talking about. Who did I leave out? Other? Okay, well that helps you understand. Who did I leave out? Housers. Okay, fair. Housers. I think that's all of us. That's right. Thank you, Francie. One team. Okay, well, let's keep going. How do we reconcile wanting to consider housing as a human right rather than an investment and wealth building tool with the wanting people of color to have the same opportunity to build wealth through home ownership?
Yeah, and this is something I alluded to, that we absolutely need to find alternative sources to produce wealth and security. The goal is to produce economic security. It can come through many different ways. One thing is clear, housing has been the primary way people have built wealth. It should be the primary foundational element, regardless of what your family gave you. You should be able to have stable housing in order to build wealth in other ways. So for me, I do think we need somewhat of a de-emphasis on building or using housing to build wealth. It's not going to go away, but what that means is we need new asset classes that people can that can drive wealth building. I'm a big fan of baby bonds, where every American essentially gets, or every child born in the U.S. essentially gets a savings account that accrues over time. So when you graduate or if you turn 18, 21, whatever the number is, you get that nest egg to either invest in a home, for college, for business. So
look up Derek Hamilton's work on that.
Hamilton's work on that. And then we need alternative ways for ownership. We need more cooperative efforts to own homes. There's a lot of land trusts, ideas that I think are very encouraging, where you're essentially owning the property, not necessarily, and sharing the equity in the land in some ways. But what is true, we have to have alternatives to the current single family ownership, single family zoning ordinances. Those need to be broken up to reflect the need for more housing, different forms of ownership, and different ways to build wealth over time.
Okay, we have 5 minutes left. We've got more questions in the Whova app than we'll be able to get to, so I'm turning to the next top vote receiver, which is, in addition to removing the sales comparison approach, where you talked about the points of comparison of other houses on the block, for example. What are other necessary changes to the appraisal process or tangential policies?
You know, there is this issue, and I know this firsthand. There are firms, appraisal firms, that are discriminating. You know, they look at black neighborhoods, black homeowners, and they just see lower value. We really do need anti-discrimination policies that are enforceable. One of the reasons why I was very encouraged when the Federal Housing Finance Agency released the data, now we can start to drill down. We can begin to see who's appraising negatively consistently, you know, and that is something that is needed. We also need communities to have this data available. It shouldn't take PhD level folks to analyze this data. These data should be available. When I first started looking at this issue, I was just amazed that there's no real database. There wasn't a database to look at this information on appraisals, on home values. You should be able to look in every county, in every city, how are the homes in this neighborhood being appraised? How are they being valued beyond how taxes are assessed? Because we know that's fraud as well. And so we need new technology to measure these things. And finally, we do need to diversify appraisers. The Property Appraisal Valuation Equity Task Force that the Biden administration put together is important, and it led to 21 action items to diversify and improve the appraisal process. Why I'm halfway encouraged by that, because if you diversify all the appraisers and they're still using the same tools, you're going to get the same result. So it's not just about saying, let's get numerical diversity. That's a workforce issue that we need to tackle. But if you're not dealing with the actual practice of appraising, it won't have the impact that you think it'll have.
All right, I think we're down to our last question.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna go rogue. So given the mix of folks that you saw in the room, what do you want that one key takeaway to be from today's conversation here in Austin and in the Travis County, Central Texas area?
Well, you know, I think the mayor had it right in this regard. You know, what has been done, some of that you can't undo. But you have got to have a vision for an inclusive city moving forward. You have to. And you have to set a city up to be inclusive, not just for today, but 5, 15, 20, 25 years from now. So your work has to be forward-thinking in a lot of ways. These demographic shifts oftentimes come rapidly. The places you think you are today may not be the place you think that you will be tomorrow. So it's better to have a hand in that, to say, hey, what are some of the building blocks of inclusion that we can work on today? So yes, you're not a majority black city. No, I'm not saying you should become one. But you certainly should understand that particularly brown folk, black people, Asian folk in this area should have a place. And you got to figure out ways to make that a reality. And this is one thing I will say, that I do think that our neighborhoods will and should look different, that they should be more inclusive. They should represent the diversity that we have to offer. Not every, these ethnic enclaves, some of it is great, and you want to preserve that. But it's it's amazing when you look at how segregated our communities are. That has to change. It has to change. And just like there was a time when jazz music, you could almost identify the player by their sound. Eventually, jazz became played and performed by everybody. Neighborhoods should have a jazz-like community in which, oh, I see the flavor, but the people in it are very diverse. You get the flavor, you get the sound, but you have the diversity in it. And so that's what I think you need to set yourselves up for.
All kinds of homes in all parts of town for all kinds of people.
That's exactly right.
Thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you. That was great.